the jungle, friend to you and me.
Oh no. George of the Jungle, it's a travesty. For those who aren't familiar with anything George of the Jungle related, I'll fill you in. Basically, in the 1960s, there was this guy named Jay Ward. He was very known for creating the show Rocky and Bullwinkle. He created a show called George of the Jungle, which is about a Tarzan XP going around saving the jungle from whatever threatens it. He was raised by apes and now has a best friend ape, named Ape. He has an elephant that acts like a dog, he's got a girlfriend named Ursula, and various hijinks ensue. Similar to Rocky and Bullwinkle, the humor is very fast-paced and very, very dialogue-heavy. While the animation is definitely crude, that was par for the course for a lot of 60s television cartoons. And even if it's not as well known as Rocky and Bullwinkle, it certainly has its place in animation history. So, one wonders why they decided to reboot it in 2007. In 2007, the Canadian animation studio Teletoon decided to air this, a remake of George of the Jungle, several decades after it was even relevant, and for an audience that probably hasn't even heard of it before. How could this possibly go wrong? Well, the first way is the theme song. Here's the original theme song.
George of the jungle, strong as he can be. Watch out for that tree!
And here's the reboot theme song.
George of the jungle, friend to you and me. Watch out for that tree!
I think one of these is better than the other. But it's not like one of these themes is trying too hard to be hip and with it with the kids but ends up just sounding terrible. No, that's definitely not it. This is not Cringe the theme song. Except it actually is. If the Super Mario Bros. Super Show has taught us anything, remixing a classic theme song never really works out. And it's also a little hint that your show might not be the best. So similar to the original 1960s series, this show is about George of the Jungle to be specific. Only this time he's looking a lot blockier and he moves a lot stiffer. Thanks to the Flash animation, of course. He pals around with Ape the Ape and they just kinda derp around and do random stuff. They don't really save the jungle except in 1 or 2 episodes when it's convenient for the plot. They just kinda do stuff. They're frequently joined by 2 girls, one named Ursula and one named Magnolia. Now, let me ask you this. Knowing that Ursula was the jungle girl in the original, which one of these 2 do you think is Ursula? That's right, the not jungle one. I don't really understand why they changed her. Maybe it was to coincide with the Brendan Fraser movie where she was actually from the city and then moved to the jungle? That's my guess. Here she's basically just some girl whose dad moved to the jungle to study it for reasons, and she's in the jungle and doesn't really care for it and is kind of the fish out of water. Only they don't really play with it too much. She's just kind of there and is kind of the straight man to the group. You know, along with Ape. So by looking at Magnolia, you would think that she is what Ursula was in the original, right? No, she's not. She's some kind of southern hick girl who spent all of her life in the jungle yet has a southern accent for some reason. Not to mention the fact that she has the most annoying voice in the entire show.
Definitely. It says, "Look at me, Jungle World. I am a superhero."
I had to watch episode upon episode with that voice. And no, it wasn't fun. It was quite annoying. As mentioned earlier, George of the Jungle 2007 doesn't really have George saving the jungle, therefore it negates the entire premise of the original. Instead, we have plots of George listening to a seashell for the first time, when being told that he could hear the ocean by doing that, only to end up hearing the voice of a crab who tells George that his name is Ocean, and George has to get him a bunch of cool stuff. There's one where Ape's favorite fruit, the banana quack, comes back in business, and they make him go crazy, so they have to tell him that they're out of season. There's one where George wins a write-in contest for one of his favorite superheroes, Mantler, only to find out everyone won. These premises don't sound like George of the Jungle, they sound like something else. What am I thinking of? Oh yeah, every single children's animated show these days. These premises feel like they'd belong in something like Sidekicks or Johnny Test. It doesn't seem like George of the Jungle. It really is just more stories about 2 super best friends derping around and getting in stupid situations. Premises are one thing though, right? How are the characters? Boring. Really, all George is just some random dude bro who doesn't say dude or bro, but talks in third person. Other than that, he's just wacky and stupid and does random things because heard it or funny. And I love Lee Takar, he's great. But when I hear his portrayal of George, I don't hear strapping jungle man, I hear whiny, annoying weirdo.
It can't be. Please, no!
Ape is very inconsistent. Most of the time he is the straight man, but every so often he'll come right along on George's little wacky adventures and be just as derpy and doofy as he is. Ape is supposed to be refined and elegant and very sophisticated. He's supposed to be above George's stupidity, and he's supposed to be the voice of reason. This is not that. He's just there to go, George, you're acting stupid, but doesn't really do anything about it. No jokes, no sarcastic quips, nothing. Really, most of the time, it's just, George, you're acting stupid, but I'm gonna be stupid anyways! Oh, okay. The voice doesn't really help either. Rather than sounding posh and elegant, he just sounds like somebody's dad who's just kinda had a mediocre day at work and is kinda ready to tell somebody off. The performance is consistently low energy and definitely doesn't suit the character. Magnolia just confuses me. Again, she's supposed to be the jungle girl, but she's pretty much as civilized as Ursula is. She obsesses over fashion, glitter, and other kind of girly stereotypical stuff, so really, what's the point of having her here? She doesn't really serve any purpose. She doesn't really throw Ursula into the jungle vibe, that's George. She doesn't really provide any sort of semblance of civilization, that's Ursula. She doesn't provide the voice of reason, that's Ape most of the time. Why is she here? Ursula is probably my favorite character out of the main cast. Yes, she is pretty annoying and naggy and is very inconsistent with sometimes being a stick in the mud and sometimes being as giddy as Magnolia. But still, when she is the straight man, or I guess straight woman of the group, she's able to bring some logic and break the stupidity of George. She never really gets to say anything funny, but it's good to know that there's at least some logic in this world. There's a bunch of various side characters too, like of course, Shep the dog elephant, Tukey, the witch doctor, Dr. Scott, but they're all very inconsequential and basically serve as just plot devices. They're mostly there just to further the story along. They never really have any character traits aside from just one or two. For example, Dr. Scott is a man of logic, and the witch doctor is a man of magic, and they don't get along. Those are their only character traits. But by far, the character that gets the worst shaft is the narrator. Now, the narrator technically isn't a character in most shows, right? Well, in George of the Jungle, the original at least, the narrator would constantly butt in and say some kind of stupid joke or address the characters. The narrator was just as much of a character as George, Ursula, or Ape. Here, the narrator is only here for, once again, plot purposes. He only pops up when it's convenient and rarely, if ever, addresses the characters. So we go from a character that's actually able to be a character despite the fact that they're usually not, into just exposition, 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 exposition. Now let's be real here though. The George of the Jungle characters in the original were hardly Shakespearean. It was all about jokes, jokes, jokes. Everything was about jokes. And boy, do they miss the mark here. It's one thing to not even try to replicate Jay Ward's style of humor, but it's another to just do that by the books Johnny Test style humor. Loud and random equals funny. The jokes in here lack any subtlety or variance. For example, there's an episode where George's cousin Larry comes to visit. Larry of the Jungle. Which, on a side note, despite being George's cousin and has apparently lived in the jungle as long as George, he looks like he came from Beverly Hills. Larry likes to win things. A lot. He's super competitive and makes everything a competition. Guess the only joke they tell with him. It's him screaming, "I win," and coming up with reasons that he won. But they're never really clever reasons, it's just, oh, well, I did this thing, I win, or I did this better than you, I win. And it's that over and over and over for 11 minutes. The only real variation that the joke gets is that it gets louder. Or there's the aforementioned Mantler episode. All the jokes really are is just George yelling things about Mantler, and they're not even interesting things or unique things. They're just yelling pieces of his merchandise or yelling cool things that he does. It's just George is an idiot, and he's loud, and he's saying random stuff sometimes. Ooh, it's funny. So it begs the question, if the characters aren't the same as the original George of the Jungle, if the humor's not the same as the original George of the Jungle, if the animation's not the same as George of the Jungle, which I'm okay with, because as much as I like Jay Ward's productions, the animations weren't really that great, and if the stories aren't going to be like the original George of the Jungle, why bother redoing George of the Jungle in the first place? My only guess is that they wanted some kind of name recognition for their project, but once again, what kid has heard of George of the Jungle in this day and age unless they've got parents that talk about it? Or unless they've seen the Brendan Fraser movie, but even then, that's not a majority of kids. The name recognition really adds nothing here when you get down to it. If you just called this show Jungle Pete and changed every character's name, I wouldn't know that this was George of the Jungle, and honestly, I probably would like it slightly more. I wouldn't like it, but again, slightly more. I can't stand remakes that remake the original and do absolutely nothing with it except have characters that have the same names. It's a big pet peeve of mine, and this is the pure embodiment of it. No class, no humor, nothing. It's just by the bones typical kids show, but just so happens to be a remake of a cartoon classic. One that it very clearly does not understand. And what a shock! This show only lasted one season! Oh man! Dang it! Oh, didn't see that coming. Such a shame. Such a shame. A year later, this did eventually make its way over to the States on Cartoon Network, but it didn't do well over there either, and it's considered part of the Cartoon Network Dark Age. But hey, at least that was the end of George of the Jungle, right? What? There's a second season? There's a second season? What? Why? When did this come out? 2016? This came out in 2016? The first season came out in 2007. So, let me get this straight. You have a show that's a really poorly received remake of a classic, it does poorly, it gets canceled after one season, vanishes from the network, and then 9 years later you revive it? But why though? Well, let's take a look at this second season and see if it fares any better. Looking at all the comments and reviews on the internet, people keep complaining about how it's so different from the original and that it's just bizarre. Oh, that doesn't look very good. Oh boy. Well, let's give it a try.
One season later.
Guys, I kinda like George of the Jungle Season 2. It's nothing spectacular, and boy howdy is it flawed, but honestly, this is definitely an improvement. Let's take a look at the theme song and see how it's different.
George of the Jungle, strong as he can be. Watch out for that tree!
See, this is a bit of a variation on the original. Obviously, this isn't the original theme song, they just jazz it up a bit, but still, they keep the same lyrics, they keep the same flow, and they make sure it keeps the same tone and spirit. No more jungle rap from the first season. That's really the main point I'm trying to get behind here. That's definitely an improvement, no matter what. But really, this is made by people who get the original. The narrator gets to be a character. He constantly butts in and tells the characters that they're acting stupid. Or he gets some bit of exposition in and actually makes jokes out of it instead of just explaining and talking your head off. The recasting is all across the board. I don't think a single voice actor returned. But honestly, they're all improvements. George sounds way more like an action and experienced jungle man. Ape sounds posh and elegant again. Ursula and... Hold on a minute. This isn't Ursula, this is Magnolia. What? But you were Ursula last season, and you were Magnolia last season. What happened? Yes, this is one of the biggest complaints that George of the Jungle Season 2 gets. They switched Ursula and Magnolia. While yes, that does provide some continuity issues, there are two reasons that this does not bug me. One, as mentioned, Ursula is supposed to be the jungle girl. Magnolia was their own creation, so really, this is the correct one. And two, this is very clearly in an entirely different continuity. Nothing is the same. I mean, if it was the same, how come Magnolia, or Ursula's, father now is an evil mad scientist named Dr. Chicago with a toothed sidekick named Cuspid? Yeah, this is entirely different, huh? Dr. Chicago is the main villain of this season. He basically wants to destroy the jungle. Why? Because he's evil! He's the perfect foil for George. He's comical and slightly ineffective and totally freakish and bizarre. He's honestly my favorite character in this season. How's the humor? Well, it definitely is trying a lot harder to be more like Jay Ward's productions, let me tell you. It doesn't always land a laugh, But every joke that gets a groan, one gets a laugh. And how about those episode plots? Well, we still get weird plots like Abe cooking a dish that nobody likes and then they try to hide it only to find out that it has some kind of connection to an alien race. But now we get stories like George finding out that meat is made out of animals, and because his whole goal in life is to save animals and befriend animals, he doesn't want to eat meat. See, that actually fits, and that actually is pretty clever. And you know what? It got a lot of laughs out of me. So yes, as weird as it is to say, I vastly prefer George of the Jungle Season 2. Unfortunately, this one failed as well. Maybe it's because the original season tainted any view on this one, or maybe it's because people just didn't want a remake of the show. I don't know, but it failed. In all honesty, I'm kind of wondering if in 9 years we're gonna get a third season of this, but it's basically just an abridged version of the original show. I mean, honestly, every time we get a new iteration of this, it gets closer to the original. It's possible, especially in the day of the internet. So that is George of the Jungle 2017/2016. The first season clearly didn't understand what made the original good. It took this witty classic and turned it into a loud, obnoxious, yet dull, typical kids show. But the second season, while not perfectly landing, definitely did make a lot more of an effort and showed that they did understand the source material. Don't check out the first season, but I would honestly say give the second one a try. To my knowledge, all of the episodes are up on YouTube. That's where I saw them. Hey, who knows? You might even like it. So folks, that was my review of George of the Jungle. What did you think about this show? Did you see it when it first came on? What are your thoughts on the 2 seasons? Comment below and let me know, because I'm excited to hear what you guys have to say. Alright, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.